Welcome to the Geometry Nodes Beginners course. In this video, I will give you an example on how to create a cool paper effect with every object. This will be a combination of geometry nodes and a bit of shading in the shader editor. But at first, let's do the geometry stuff and then comes the shading part of it. So at first, let's select your object and open the Geometry Nodes editor. You can close this and create a new group like this. So at first, because I want to create something which looks like it's been made out of paper or thin cardboard, I want to create an object which is a bit non-symmetrical and a bit off, so a bit crooked here and there, since it makes it more realistic, because when you fold something out of paper or cardboard, it will not perfectly be mathematically parallel and everything. That's why I will approach this first. And this is pretty simple. You only have to move points around randomly a little bit. So for this, I will just use the set position node, which moves points around basically. And here you can move points now. But of course, here you can only move them uniformly. I want to move every point a little bit different, and for that I want to influence it with a random value node. To do that, I will just add it and use the vector out and input, because I want to randomize vectors. And then I just want to randomize a little bit here. To make this even, because I have to use a minimum and a maximum value, and to make this easier to handle or control, I will set up a little setting here where I only need to tweak one point here or one node. To do that, I want to use a math multiply node like this, and then I just want to connect the value in the math multiply and multiply everything with -1. And put this into the minimum, and then just connect the value to the maximum. Here in this case, it doesn't really matter that I'm transforming here a float into a vector, since it's totally random anyway, and I don't really care in which direction they're gonna be spread out. And when I now connect this value to the offset, then I can change here this value, and this value here now changes the random direction basically, or the maximum random direction in which the points move. And here we created something where I control the maximum and the minimum at the same time, and they are equally high. So if I type, for example, something like 0.003, then I will move the points slightly around in directions which are equally long. So when I now go to the edit mode, you can see that I moved it a little bit. Here on this corner, you can see here was the original point, and now the point is here. And you can just tweak this value if you want to increase or decrease it. So here you just randomize the position basically a little bit, but let's just keep it on 0.004 or something, where it's a little bit visible like this. Alright, so now we got our little randomization. And now everything is a little bit off and a little bit crooked. And now we can continue with the real part. So to create this effect, this paper effect, I need some edges to be open, where you can see the seam of the cardboard or whatever, or the paper. And to do that, I want to split the edges. Maybe now it's a good time to switch from this cube to a monkey geometry, for example, because here you can see a little bit more about this effect now. So let me just put some nodes in between here. And it is the split edges node. So split edges. And with this, I just split the edges. I just opened the edges here. And what I just did now is I split every edge. So basically what we have now here are just individual faces which aren't connected anymore. I split every edge, so now we have only individual faces here, no connections anymore. I will change that later, but for now it's like this. Alright, and now I want to extrude here these individual faces with the extrude mesh node. Alright, this looks a little bit messy, but it's alright. At first I want to put this value here very far down, let's say 0.004 or something. So you can see here now they get extruded a little bit. And let's just keep it on individual. In this case, it's not that important, but later it will be. So, and this is basically how you can create something like this. You now created a shader, or not a shader, but a geometry where you can see inside a little bit of something, and it looks like you really have something like a cardboard here where you can see in the seams. But it's a bit problematic that we can see every single edge here, because of course when you fold something out of cardboard, then you won't have that many seams. You will have seams here and there, but not every single face will be a seam. So it would be way more realistic if you only have like 20% of the seams actually visible and the rest not, because you often just fold cardboard and you don't cut it. So let's say you have something like this, like a cube, then maybe you only cut it here and the visible seam will only be here. And here on these edges, it's just folded and you don't see any seams. So that's not very realistic, and that's why we're going to change it now. So to do that, I just want to select basically the angles which I want to cut, and then I will use the split edges selection plug here to only split the edges I want to split. So I want to isolate basically the faces. Let's just zoom in a little bit, and I can do this, for example, by calculating an angle. Because, let me just show you that, when I just add a cube again, and I, let's say, want to have a subdivision here. The problem here is, let me just move that upwards, that one thing. So the problem is I am creating cuts as well on these parts here. That's a bit problematic, because every flat face basically has its own cut, because every face was cut. And it's not that realistic to have cuts all over the place, especially in flat regions. So basically I want to have flat regions that they don't have seams, and on flat areas it's not visible, only where the angle is higher, like this. So here, when you have here a visible seam, it's way more realistic than to have a lot of visible seams on this flat face, because it wouldn't make sense when you fold something to cut through flat surfaces which are just plain cardboard. So let's get into it. Let me just delete that. And now we're going to proceed with selecting basically flat areas and excluding them then from the cutting process or the split edge node. So you can do this with the edge angle node, and we want to use the unsigned angle plug for this. And here you can just, for example, tell, let me just move this a bit like this. Here you can just tell which angle you want to have. So for example, I will use a compare node, and you can use here, for example, a comparison. Now you can choose an angle here in radians, how big it should be when the edge gets split. And when I now increase this value here, you can see that more and more edges are not split anymore. And of course, it's starting with the edges which are very flat, basically. Because when you hit this angle threshold, then you will exclude this, basically. So what you just built here, pretty simple, is you have the edge angle of every edge, and then you ask it, is it greater than, let's say, 0.3? And if it is, then this will be a yes. So this is either a 0 or a 1. And every edge which is greater here will be a 1, and it will get split by this. So, but since I want a bit randomized pattern and not every angle which is flat should be just excluded from it, so sometimes I want to have a cut on a flat surface. So it's a bit randomized, so it's just the way it looked the most realistic. I want to add another reference where Blender or the split edges modifier operates a yes or a no. And I will just build this now. So at first I want to use the index of the points. And then I want to randomize these indexes or these indices. Because when they're not randomized, their pattern is way too uniform, and I want to have a total random distribution on the object. And you can do this with a random value node on integer, since indices are integers, and you connect it to the ID, and now you can basically set here the range for the indices. So let's put this from 0 to 10 to make it simple. So now my indices are either 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. So 11 different things. We could do it like this, for example, and then it's from 1 to 10, but let's keep it that way. And now again, I want to have a compare node. We can steal this from below and use this with integer. And then ask it, for example, is it less than or equal? And then we'll use this result. And then I want to calculate these two possibilities. Either the angle is big enough that it gets split. And additionally, with this, I just built something where I can decide basically how much % of the angles which are sharp enough should have a split edge. And I can do this with a math boolean. When you connect it here and you connect these both results, it will only output a true value when this and this, so plug 1 and plug 2, when they both are true. Then it will be split. So by this now, let me just explain that. By this, we just built something where we can here decide an angle. So let's make this angle pretty small. Let's say 0.1 radians. So here we have an angle. If this angle here is reached, so if it's above it, then this one is true. So only edges which are sharp enough or high enough will get split at all. And all of these sharp edges, because 0.1 is pretty small, so most of them will be selected basically. And then here I have a second selection of these which have a high enough angle. All of these now go through this, and here they have to have an integer less or equal than this number. And when you now increase this number, maybe you can see that. Now, when I start to turn on these numbers up and down, you can see that more and more get selected basically. And on 10, everything will be selected when it has the correct angle. And yeah, when the angle is not too flat. Yeah, for example, take this here. This top, currently you can see it's split, but when I move it down, at some point it will disappear because it's not, the angle is not high enough. So this angle here is now below the 0 point radian, and by this it will be deselected anyway because this only counts if both are true. So in this case here, you can see it's deselected, and it doesn't matter now what index here is because it's just disabled by this. And every other thing here will now have an integer as its index, and here you can now basically dial in how much % you want to have, we want to split. Do you have 10? Do you want to have 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50? So let's say I want to have here something pretty high, so let's say 8. So now everything will be split when it's, when this is true, and this is now about 80% of the points or the edges, and now you can see that most of them are split. But not all of them, but most of them. And when you reduce this, for example, to 4, then only a couple are now split. So let's say 5. About half are split and about half are not. Yeah, for example here, this is not split, this 2, this 2, this is here, and this is not split either. Yeah, so although they have the correct angle, they are not split. And by this you have a, more realistic look because not everything is split, which has the correct angle. And so this is way more realistic than it was before. And the cool thing here is you have now a seed slider here too, so you can just randomize the pattern. So when you say, oh, it's not cool that here these are selected, you can just randomize the distribution pattern to change the assignment of the indices. And by this, you just change the cutting pattern basically. When I now turn this, maybe you want to have that here is not that much split. You just click it a couple of times, for example, seed 7. I have only one split here. Maybe this fits more what you want to see. Alright, so this was basically already the geometry part of it, and now we'll come to the shading part, which is important too. But to be able to come to that, I just have to assign some materials here. So at first, I want to use a set material node and a second for later. And for example, the extruded stuff should be the outer paper. So the parts you can actually see very well, the surface, like this and so on. So this should be the paper. So let me just call this paper outside, for example. And then I want to create another, which is paper inside. And I want to create here, for example, or select paper inside and here paper outside. Because, for example, the paper inside is something like you can see where the cardboard was glued together and so on. Yeah, so it's darker and has holes and so on. And the outer surface is just the plain paper. All right, so the extruded part should be, so let's go here. So let's just select this material for the outer parts of the extrusions. So when you have a face here and you extrude it this direction, then this here is the outer surface. So I want to have the paper outside here on the outer surface, and the paper inside, let's go here, should be the side basically of it, which is here and here. So this are the sides, and this here is the top. And you want to have the cardboard visible here and the top visible here. Yeah, that's just how, yeah, when you fold something, it looks like that. All right, so now we assigned everything like this. And it's not that big tree. It's fine, yeah, so it's not that overcomplicated. Yeah, if you want to, you can make this a bit more easy to read by make a little frame around everything. So when you select something here, let's say I want to select these, and then with Ctrl J, you can frame them. And then when you press F2, you can rename them. So let's say this is the crook geometry with the input, set position, and this randomization. And this here below would be the edge selection, like this. And then here, this is then the cutting edge part. Now this is a bit more tidy and you can read what's happening here in these areas. All right, so now we can proceed with defining these paper materials. For that, I just want to go to the material viewport here, and maybe I want to switch in Eevee on the ambient occlusion to see the shadows a bit better here. All right, now let's proceed with the shading. All right, so yeah, let's start with the paper outside, I would say. For the paper outside, I at first want to create a noise texture because I just want to have a little bit of, yeah, paper surface color. Yeah, so let's just use a noise texture and just use the factor at first here. Something like this. Of course, this is a bit too soft here, but yeah, it's fine. Yeah, so let's make this a bit like that. Something like this. Yeah, it's your choice what you want to do. And then you can use a color ramp to define what gray and what white here means. So let's just change this to a bit more bright yellowish thing, something like that. And this to a little bit darker thing here. So maybe something like that, and maybe increase the roughness a bit to 0.75 or something. All right, so now I've created my paper, maybe a bit brighter. It's a bit hard here. All right, so this is okay, I guess, like this. And now you can already see that you can see now the white spots, which is then the paper inside part, which comes in a minute. But let me just create a noise texture for the bump here as well, because for now it's very glossy and very straight. So let's bring some kind of texture to the bumps. For that, I want to use a bump map here, like this. And I want to use a noise texture as well for the height. And yeah, I want to have very little grains here basically, so let's put this to 10, then it looks like this, and then make the scale maybe a bit higher, let's say 11 or something. So this looks alright, but it's a bit strong. So let's pull it back down, something like this maybe. Yeah, or maybe this is even too strong, let's say 0.26 or something. So then you have a bit, let's view it by this, yeah. So by that you have a little bumps and it looks more like paper or cardboard. Alright, so the first shader is finished. Now let's proceed with the second, the inside shader basically. So let's look at here. So to do that, let me just zoom very far here on something that I can see my geometry here. So what we are now coloring is basically these areas here. So what's white currently, or when I put this down, you may see it a bit better, the black areas here. I mean, you can just give it a plain color. It will be fine too, I think, but to make it more realistic, I want to create the illusion of cardboard inside material. And my method is just to use a Voronoi texture, which I modify a bit, and then it will be fine. Yeah, so it's very tiny, you won't spot it, the difference, but yeah, it's a bit more realistic if you're a bit closer. Okay, so let's add the Voronoi pattern and use the distance, which is basically, yeah, which are little circles. When I increase the scale very, very far, let's say to 1000, you can see how a Voronoi texture looks like that. And when I now, for example, take here a color ramp, and then I want to use here, let's say, dark brown, a dark brown color, something like, I don't know, something like that. And here, instead of white, I want to use a more light brown, maybe something like this. And then move them closer together. You can see I create, yeah, some kind of round shapes here. So, and this looks a bit like the inner part of a cardboard. I mean, of course, it's very close now, but this is a microscopic view on this. And you can, yeah, create or play a bit around with it. Yeah, maybe make this a bit larger, something like that. Or make this, the scale smaller to make the circles larger and so on. And it looks a bit weird because the randomness is pretty high. When you put the randomness to 0, you can see that the position here is basically on a grid here, like this. And now it looks a bit more like this cardboard inner part. Oops, on 1000. And now you can just play a bit around with it until you're, yeah, about happy. So when you say, okay, this is fine, maybe make this a bit darker and this darker too. So like that. So from the far, when you look from a bit, yeah, more far away, you can't really tell then if it's not, or I mean, if it's correct or not. For example, on this distance here, it looks pretty realistic, like a cardboard inside, the little holes from the small cardboard cells glued together. And I just want to use the same thing here, the same output of the color ramp for my bump. Yeah, because then it will drop some shadows here, which makes it more realistic. So let's go on here, and maybe I want to reduce the roughness here too on something very high, 0.85 or something. So now let's just add a bump as the height and use this in the normal. And now I'm dropping some shadows on here too. And now it looks a bit too dark. So let me fix this a bit by making this not too dark. Like that. Alright, so this looks fine to me. Yeah, from this perspective, it looks alright. And of course, the bigger your holes are, your split edges, extrusions here are, the more you see it. But in general, it's pretty okay now. And now you can see the effect which, yeah, I was going for. To have something, yeah, which is cut a bit and then extruded a bit, that it looks like it was folded out of paper or cardboard. And let's switch to cycles, for example. And then, yeah, just use the default Blender scene here. And maybe let's use a denoising here. All right, then you can maybe see it a bit. And then it looks like this here, for example. Yeah, so it looks a bit like it's made out of paper. I mean, this shape here is pretty edgy, and yeah, it's a very unusual shape for paper in general. but yeah, the effect is definitely recognizable. Now you have this effect basically, which is in this geometry nodes tree with this paper outside and inside and everything. And now you can easily create a little scene, yeah, with this geometry node. Let me just go to the preview, back to the Eevee preview. And now I can show you how you can quickly create a little paper scene. Since you have everything now at hand, let me just hide this. And then, yeah, let's start with a plane and add this modifier we just created. I mean, we could rename it to something useful, for example, paper effect. And then you can start building a house, for example. So let's do it like this and then extrude it again. And then like this, for example. And then let's create a little chimney like this, move it upwards like that, and so on. So something like this, for example. And then we could add some doors or windows, and you can just cut something inside it. So let me just switch back to orthographic. So for example, if I want to have a door or something, I can just use the knife tool, which you can access with the hotkey K. If you press K, now you can click and click and click, and then close it, and then confirm it with return. And now you have created a bit of geometry here, which you can now just extrude, for example. Yeah, but that was just an example, of course. So for example, a door, and you can be a bit crooked as well, since this is made out of paper. So let's just create a little door, and let's create a little doorknob or a little handle. And then you can, yeah, just extrude it outwards. And if you're a bit confused about this here, this is of course because the points are moved. If you want, you can disable this effect in the edit mode, and then you will only see it in the object mode when you tab out of it. So let's just do this and then create some windows, for example. So K, like this. By the way, if you double click, it will automatically close to where you started. So when I do this, click, 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 and now I double click here, it will automatically return to the first point. Yeah, so now we have created some windows. Let's extrude them inwards. Create a little face with an inset with I, and then E again for extrude, and then you created little windows on your paper house, just like that. And from now on, it's pretty easy to create simple things. Yeah, so let's say I want to create a little balcony, just like that, pull that out, and then you can view it from above and so on. Yeah, and by this you can create little things out of wood or something. Oops, that was wrong. For the little bars there. Then extrude these as well. And then, I don't know, yeah, you could just extrude this and so on. Yeah, so it's just from here like this. And then you have a little balcony there. And of course, it needs a door as well. Yeah, something like this and so on. Yeah, so you can just keep cutting things in there and so on, and then you can create very fast little paper figures out of it very efficiently. So it's very fast to do that when you once got it, and when you look at it here in the Eevee viewport, for example. Yeah, it looks very nice here. And yeah, when you, for example, take a look, I don't know, here at this window. So it looks a bit like you just cut something out and glued it together and made a couple of mistakes and so on. Yeah, for example, here like this, and this looks pretty nice. Yeah, so it's a bit like a puppet house, yeah, made out of cardboard and so on. So this has a pretty sympathetic look and is very quickly editable. Yeah, so you can either create or edit the tree here, for example, increase the crooked points here and increase this. I mean, of course, it's very hard here, but you can see that you can decide how deformed everything is. Or when you want to reduce it a bit, you just make this to 0.003, and then it's a bit more straight. Or if you want to increase the amount of edges which are cut, then you can just increase this or decrease it to make less cuts. Yeah, for example, it depends on which object, of course, you're operating with. But here in this case, I would say a bit more is maybe better, like this. And then it looks a bit more realistic. And if you're not happy with that distribution, you can just click on the seed a couple of times, click, 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 until you say, oh, now my window here looks pretty nice, I like that, and so on. Yeah, and then you can render your scene or just keep on building. Or you create a tree or plants or something like this. Yeah, since this is just a modifier, basically, a geometry node modifier, you can just create a simple plant or something. Yeah, you can just use a, let's say, plane here, scale it down here too, so pretty small. And then you can just create something like this. Just a little, I don't know, yeah, plant, whatever, tree, like this, and maybe you want to extrude it here and there. Something like that. Or whatever, yeah, you can just play a bit around with it. I don't know, yeah, this is a bit ugly now, but you get it, yeah, you get the effect. So you can just add it to it and then, oh yeah, this is nice, and so on. And maybe you're now thinking, what if I want to have separate distributions here of this pattern? So when I now, for example, say my tree is cool and my tree is nice, but my house distribution is not that nice, I don't like it, and you now change this seed value here, then of course everything changes since it's the same modifier. And there is a solution for that, because everything which is in this modifier here is of course globally active for every object with this modifier. Of course you could just copy this modifier, for example, paper effect house, and then you duplicate this, and then you say paper effect tree, and then you give the tree, and the house, and then this is only for the tree, and this is only for the house. I mean, this is a workaround too, but there's a better way to do it. You can just make it individually scalable. And you can do this with just connecting things to the group output. So let me maybe I want to detach it here. So the group output here, when you plug something in the group output, it will appear here in the output attributes. So for example, something you want to have for individual objects, like the seed, you just connect it here, and then it will appear here. And when you do this, this number here is now not globally active, but for this particular object. That's because now you can basically select it from the outside. So this modifier here is only active for this object plane. I mean, we could recall it house, and we could call it this tree. And for example, on the house, I want to have a seed of 3, and on the tree, I want to have a seed of 10. And when I now switch between them, you can see it's individual now. Now you can select individual numbers, and that's just because you rerouted it to the group input. So the group input here, when you plug values in there, they are not globally anymore, but on the individual object only. And now you could start to reroute other things. For example, this value here, you could reroute it too. If I now just delete and just select this value and this value, now my value here is here basically, but again individual. Before it was 0.003, and on this, let's say I want to have it more crooked, 0.005. And now my house is more crooked than the tree. You can see that here. If I switch it again back and forth, you can see here tree is 0.003, house is 0.005. Or I want to have it really crooked like this, or I don't know, yeah, like this, and then it's very broken. Yeah. And now my tree is 0.003 and this is 0.04. Yeah, just for example. All right, so this is how you can reroute things to the group input, and by this you put them basically out of the globally modifier itself and have it individually on the object level. And now you can create little paper cities or little buildings or scenes pretty simply with this geometry nodes effect, with this a bit crooked appearance, selecting edges, cutting the edges, and assigning 2 different materials to the front, so the top or the side of it, and then in the shader editor, let's say the inside is then this, the dark cardboard part, these inside parts here is then the paper inside assignment, and the paper outside assignment is this brighter, more plain color. And by this, of course, you can play with the colors as much as you want to. Yeah, like this, I don't know, yeah, whatever you want to do. And then you can just create exactly this cool paper effect, and you can experiment a lot with it, and you can make alternatives to it or add other things, but this is a very good base of your paper model appearance when you have 3D objects, and now you can have your little paper city or scene. That's all for this video. Thank you and see you at the next one.